Why are some Americans welcoming immigrants with open arms, while others see them as a threat to their way of life? The truth might surprise you, and it goes far beyond politics. In the United States, immigration has always been a deeply personal and political issue. But in recent years, the conversation has intensified. When asked what they think about immigrants, Americans don't give a single answer. In fact, depending on where they live, what they watch, or who they talk to, their answers might be completely different, even contradictory. Let's start with a recent survey by Pew Research Center. When asked whether immigrants strengthen or burden the country, about two-thirds of Americans, specifically 63%, said that immigrants mostly strengthen the country through hard work and talents. But that same survey revealed that a large minority, around 27%, still believes immigrants are a burden, taking jobs and services. And while that might seem like a clear divide, it's only the surface. One of the most surprising patterns is how differently people from different parts of the country view immigration. In big urban centers like New York City or Los Angeles, immigration is often seen not only as normal, but essential. Immigrants there make up huge parts of the workforce, from restaurants to healthcare to tech. In those places, many Americans see immigrants as their neighbors, co-workers, and friends. But move into more rural or traditionally conservative areas, and you'll hear a different story. There, immigration is often tied to fear of job competition, crime, cultural changes, or simply the unknown. And these aren't just gut feelings. They're shaped by years of political messaging and media framing. Cable news plays a huge role here. Americans who regularly watch conservative media outlets are far more likely to view immigration negatively. A study by the University of Southern California found that viewers of one specific major network were nearly twice as likely to say that immigrants increase crime, despite decades of crime statistics showing that immigrants, especially undocumented ones, are actually less likely to commit crimes than native-born citizens. At the same time, social media has added fuel to the fire. Algorithms favor outrage, and immigration is the perfect storm. Images of crowded border crossings, clips of political speeches, and viral videos often spread without context. This leads many Americans to believe the immigration situation is out of control, even when data doesn't support that. For example, while the southern border sees heavy attention in the news, far fewer Americans know that nearly half of undocumented immigrants in the U.S. came legally but overstayed their visas. These people didn't sneak through a fence. They arrived by plane, often with tourist or student visas, and simply never left. But that fact rarely makes it into the national conversation. Then there's the economy. On one hand, many Americans worry that immigrants take away jobs or depress wages. But economists, including those from the Congressional Budget Office, have consistently shown that immigration actually helps the economy. Immigrants often take jobs that are hard to fill, especially in agriculture, construction, and elder care. They also start businesses at higher rates than native-born citizens, and they contribute billions in taxes each year, even when undocumented. Still, economic anxiety is real. For someone living paycheck to paycheck, it doesn't matter what the macroeconomic charts say. What they see is competition, and that fear is often amplified during times of economic downturn or instability. The emotional side of this issue can't be overstated. For many Americans, immigration isn't just a policy topic. It feels personal. Some feel like their culture is changing too quickly. Some worry their children won't have the same opportunities. Others simply feel left behind in a country that seems to be moving forward without them. When politicians or media figures tap into those fears, their words resonate deeply. And it's not just fear. There's also pride and nostalgia. Many Americans are the grandchildren of immigrants, and they feel a connection to that legacy. But they also see a difference between then and now. They say their ancestors came legally, learned English quickly, and assimilated. Whether or not that's entirely accurate, it shapes how they view current immigration. For them, today's immigrants seem different, more visible, less American, less interested in blending in. But here's where it gets complicated. While the conversation about immigration can be tense, the actual relationships tell a different story. A 2022 study found that Americans who personally know immigrants are significantly more likely to support immigration. In other words, the more personal the connection, the more positive the view. And that leads to one of the quiet truths about this issue. Much of the fear around immigration exists where immigrants themselves are scarce. In places with little diversity, the unknown becomes a breeding ground for suspicion. But in areas with more immigrant populations, people see the reality, the struggles, the work ethic, the contributions. Generational views also play a role. Younger Americans, especially those under 35, are far more supportive of immigration than older generations. For many young people, diversity is a given. They've grown up with classmates from different backgrounds, heard multiple languages in school, and watched international media. For them, immigration doesn't feel like a threat. It feels like part of the American story. Still, there's a disconnect. Even as public opinion overall grows more positive toward immigration, policy remains gridlocked. Democrats and Republicans rarely agree on the path forward. Some Americans want more border enforcement. Others want more pathways to citizenship. And while most say they support legal immigration, few agree on what that should look like in practice. This tension creates an emotional tug-of-war. Pride in America as a nation of immigrants, mixed with anxiety about what that means today. It's a battle between values, openness, fairness, safety, identity, and the outcome is still unfolding. The next part will explore why immigration remains such a powerful political weapon, who benefits from fueling division, and what most Americans still don't understand about the immigration system. The contradictions are deeper than you might think, and the consequences even more surprising. To understand why immigration remains such a powerful and divisive issue in the United States, we have to look beyond public opinion and examine the political and structural forces behind it. Despite most Americans agreeing that the immigration system is broken, very little changes. The reason for that isn't a lack of ideas. It's that immigration has become one of the most effective political tools in modern American politics. For decades, politicians from both parties have used immigration not just as a policy issue, but as a symbol, a way to signal values, fears, and identities. In election cycles, immigration often becomes a centerpiece of campaigns, not because there's a genuine plan to fix it, but because it activates voters emotionally. It becomes less about laws and more about who belongs and who doesn't. For example, during national campaigns, candidates often emphasize threats at the border, using loaded language like invasion or crisis. This rhetoric is effective. It creates urgency, fear, and a sense of identity under threat. But it also leads to confusion. Many Americans don't realize that the vast majority of immigrants don't arrive through illegal border crossings. Nor do they know how complicated and often impossible it is to immigrate legally under current U.S. laws. The legal immigration process can take years or even decades, depending on a person's country of origin, profession, or family ties. There's no simple get-in-line process, especially for those fleeing violence or extreme poverty. Yet political sound bites rarely acknowledge this complexity. Another layer of misunderstanding surrounds asylum seekers. Under international and U.S. law, it is legal to present oneself at the border and request asylum. These individuals aren't sneaking in. They are following the process, often after escaping war, persecution, or collapse. But in political debates, this distinction is usually erased. Everyone gets lumped together: refugees, visa overstays, undocumented workers, and even legal immigrants. This oversimplification benefits those who want to keep immigration in the realm of emotional politics. By creating a broad and blurry narrative of illegals or outsiders, it becomes easier to stir fear and harder for nuanced, fact-based discussions to happen. Meanwhile, there's a financial side to all of this that often goes unnoticed. Immigrant labor is deeply embedded in the American economy, not just in agriculture or food service, but also in construction, healthcare, childcare, and tech. Employers rely on immigrant labor, sometimes exploiting the lack of legal protections for undocumented workers. Entire industries benefit from this labor, while the broader system leaves these workers in limbo. Ironically, many of the loudest voices calling for stricter immigration controls are based in states that heavily depend on immigrant labor. States like Texas and Florida have both pushed hardline immigration policies while relying on undocumented workers in farming, hospitality, and elder care. This contradiction is rarely acknowledged publicly, but it underscores a quiet truth. The American economy needs immigrants more than it admits. And then there's the humanitarian angle, one that's often ignored. Many Americans don't see the full human cost of the immigration debate. Children separated from parents, families stuck in detention, or people living in legal limbo for years. Behind every headline about border security, there are real people, some of whom risked everything to come to the United States. Yet the system remains stuck. Year after year, Congress fails to pass meaningful reform. Temporary protections are granted and then taken away. Border policies shift with each administration. Immigrants are left with uncertainty, and Americans are left frustrated, believing that nothing ever gets fixed. Still, there are signs of hope. In many communities, local programs have built bridges between immigrants and native-born residents. Schools have developed bilingual programs. Churches, nonprofits, and neighborhood organizations have stepped up to support integration. And on the ground, the story is often much different than the national conversation. It's one of cooperation, mutual benefit, and shared humanity. Take, for example, the small town in Minnesota where Somali immigrants have revitalized a dying downtown. Or the neighborhood in Houston where Venezuelan and Central American families now run thriving businesses. These stories exist, but they're rarely amplified in national media. Instead, the focus remains on conflict. Part of that is because division sells. News outlets and social platforms are built to keep people engaged, and conflict keeps people watching. So while most Americans support both border security and a path to legal status, their screens are filled with stories that push them to pick sides. This divide is not just about immigration. It reflects a deeper struggle in American society over identity, belonging, and change. Immigration just happens to be the flashpoint where all those tensions collide. But what if the conversation changed? What if instead of seeing immigrants as symbols of a broken system, they were seen as individuals, people trying to build lives, raise families, and contribute to a country they believe in? What if policy debates started with facts instead of fear? Because at the core, the immigration debate is really about what kind of country the United States wants to be. A place that honors its immigrant roots, or one that closes its doors out of fear? A place that sees diversity as strength, or one that sees it as threat? These are not easy questions, but they are essential. And now, here's a question for you. How do you think America can move from division to understanding when it comes to immigration? And what role do you think everyday people play in that change?